Hello my friends, I'm Bianca, the ticking time blonde, and today we have Duncan in the studio to talk about his 3-watch collection. Welcome, great to have you in today, Duncan.
Thanks, Bianca. Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So where does this hobby begin of yours of watch collecting?
For me, it really goes back probably to the mid-2000s. I'll kick off if that's okay. Shall we just jump straight in?
Why not?
Okay, let's do it. Let's do it. I want to showcase this watch, which I know is a bit of a big hitter to really sort of kick things off with. But this really sort of started it all for me back in the mid-2000s. It's a bit of a bittersweet story because my father passed away 18 or 19 years ago now. I was basically looking for a sort of a keepsake, family heirloom, I suppose, if you will, to sort of remember him by. And he left us, me and my sister, a little bit of money. I wanted, just something to sort of, hold on to his memory and sort of keep something in the family. And I wasn't particularly into watches per se at the time. I was working with a couple of guys who were sort of big into watches, and I sort of thought, well, that might be something quite nice to sort of have. But I really didn't know anything outside of Rolex and Patek, maybe.
Mainstream.
Mainly Rolex, pretty much. And so anyway, I spoke to a good friend of mine, and I was living in London at the time, and we went out shopping down Bond Street. I'd probably sort of say this was at a time long before sort of social media. So all of these watches that we're looking at and talking about today weren't hyped at all. You can walk into virtually any boutique and pretty much pick up what you wanted. So we ended up in the Patek boutique, and the watches even back then were not cheap, not by a long shot. Everything was pretty much readily available, and I happened to just see the Aquanaut in a display case, and that's the one watch that sort of caught my eye. I inquired how much that watch was, and I got it out of the case, and I looked at it, and I probably shouldn't really have inquired about the price initially, but it was one of those watches that just sort of, I just saw it initially and just piqued my interest. I just loved it. It was just the simplicity of the dial, the uniqueness of the dial, the case shape, the thinness, which I knew nothing about the movement. I knew really nothing other than just aesthetically, it just really sort of appealed to me. And yeah, I pulled the pin. I pulled the pin on this watch. This is a Patek Aquanaut 5167, I believe. I actually got this in the first year of release, so I actually ended up purchasing this watch in 2007. And yeah, I mean, it was a lot of money for me at those times. It was. I mean, even now, it was a huge sum of money, and what I sort of felt a bit sort of sick spending that kind of money on essentially just a wristwatch. But it was my first luxury piece. Stupidly thought that would be my last luxury piece, and I wore it. I literally wore it every day, almost. And it just became sort of my one watch until the time eventually, and I can't recall when this was, until the time that these types of watches started getting more hyped, and they started getting more interest from people, and I think it was the whole sort of social media phenomenon sort of really started pitching these watches, and I don't know who was wearing it at the time, but anyway, they started to become a bit more prominent. And at that point, I think, and I can't recall exactly when this was, but somebody sort of said to me, "Oh, that's a pretty nice watch. It's a pretty expensive watch, that." And I was like, "Oh yeah, well, it was pretty expensive." "Oh yeah, no, but do you know what they're worth now?" And I was like, "Well, no, I really didn't. I didn't care. It was just my watch. I wasn't really interested in value particularly of it. I just liked wearing it, enjoyed wearing it." And then when I did find out what the value was worth, I think I was a little more careful. But that's when I actually decided to then strap got pretty well worn, and I actually replaced that with another Patek rubber strap at great expense. But in the interim period, I put it on a NATO, and it's sort of become a bit of a thing, I think, probably for me, not for anybody else. I don't think anybody else wears an Aquanaut and a NATO. I think I'm sort of fairly unique in that sense, but it's supremely comfortable. It's still really thin, really wearable. I barely notice I've got it on my wrist. And what I do love about it is I don't garner the attention really from anybody. Even people that know watches tend to do a double take when they see it on a NATO. And I kind of like that. It's a pretty major part of my rotation. I still wear it a lot. It has had a little bit of refinishing and things on the case because it got pretty beat up. But yeah, this is essentially the reminder of my dad, basically, and it's an important sort of part of my overall collection. Is really the cornerstone, I think, of the collection, to be honest, and the one watch that everything else could potentially is potentially on the table, to go or to be changed up, but but this one absolutely stays. So yeah, so that is my Aquanaut.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing the sentiment behind your Aquanaut. I see we have an IWC on the table.
We do. Yeah, we do. Let's get that one out and have a look. So yeah, we couldn't really get two different watches on the table, really, could we? Here, it's quite different from the Aquanaut. This watch doesn't really have a special story necessarily associated with it, rather than just the feeling and the history that this watch kind of evokes for me. The thing that initially attracted me to the Aquanaut was the Arabic numerals on the dial. I've always loved Arabic numerals on the dial of a watch, and whether it's a legibility thing, I've always liked that sort of design, and so that translates across a lot of other watches, and it ends up sort of meaning that I sort of naturally gravitate towards pilots' watches because of the legibility and because they are famously or usually have Arabic numerals on the dial. It's not something I wear every day.
I was gonna say, because it's quite a thick and large face.
Yeah, it is. This is a bit of an event putting on this watch. I mean, I ride motorbikes as well, okay. Particularly older sort of style. I've always had an interest in sort of older style, vintage motorbikes, and so this is a watch that I sort of feel, you don a leather jacket, you get on your sort of vintage Triumph Bonneville, and this watch just sort of embodies that. It sounds a bit sort of pretentious to say, and I don't really like, it's not how I generally approach watches. I don't buy watches to try and emulate something else but it's just a feeling that it gives me. The first thing about the watch is, and I'm trying to sound like John Mayer doing this because he talks about this watch a lot, and I don't want to come across and just rehash what he sort of says. But the gearing on it, he does talk about this. The gearing is freaking amazing. It's awesome. Like when you wind this watch, you can sort of hear it. It's so audible. When you wind the watch, you can almost feel the resistance in the mechanism in the sort of mainspring. You can actually feel that way more than any other watch. Watches are generally sort of measured in by how sort of smooth they are to wind, and where they're buttery smooth, and that's lovely and stuff. But this, you really sort of feel that gearing. There's a real sort of weight to the mainspring, so you can feel the mainspring actually sort of tightening up. So as you wind it, it's that I love. Twin barrel, so it gives it like an 8-day power reserve. So that's also amazing. So even if I wear it like once a week, it's still holding time. I also love the buffer leather strap. Like the newer variations and newer models of these big pilots now, I think have an Italian sort of leather style strap, which is beautiful, but it sort of loses a bit of its charm. And the one actually preceding this, which was the reference 5002, which is the one that John Mayer famously reviews in like that Houdinki episode. So he talks about that one. I mean, that's kind of iconic, and the strap on that is, I think, slightly better than this one. But I do love that sort of slightly gloss. Almost like sort of alligator, really thick buffalo leather strap. It really kind of
complements.
Yeah, it does. It really pulls in the era of the watch and everything. It embodies a lot of things I love about watches in terms of legibility. It's a little playful in the sense that it sort of evokes a bygone era, which I also quite like. You can almost, when you sort of look at this watch, you can almost take yourself back to the Second World War and climbing into the cockpit of like sort of a B-52 or a Spitfire and imagine the guys, and you almost can get that smell. It's that this watch sort of evokes to me. So whilst the Aquanaut evokes, sort of memories and sentimentality, this sort of evokes a bygone era of watches. And there's lots of watches that do that. And, a lot of it is perhaps down to sort of marketing. No one's flying planes with these anymore. Maybe I'm a sucker for the marketing story. And actually, it fits, it fits sort of what it is, a bit of an event putting the watch on, but it fits. It's not the smallest watch. It's not really meant to be. One of those watches I sort of have to be, like it's not going to work when I go to work wearing a shirt, for example. It's just not going to look right. It's not that kind of watch. But, put on a nice sort of leather jacket or bomber jacket in the winter and strap this on, it looks apart. It looks awesome, and I love it. Of course, as John Mayer says, you can use it as a nightstand.
I feel with your last watch here, there's quite a story behind it.
I had a bit of a tricky decision, thinking about what 3 watches I was going to bring. The Aquanaut was always in play. The IWC, there were a couple others I was potentially thinking about, but that's just so sits on its own in the collection, so I thought it should really sort of come along. This next one, it only came into my possession relatively recently, actually. So this watch I don't know a huge amount about technically. This is a Favre Leuba. They were very prominent in the sort of the 30s through 50s, I believe. Anyway, this particular watch was given to my dad on his 21st birthday, 1933. We're currently in the process of selling the family home back in Scotland, in the UK. And my mum was back there a few months ago, and she came across this. I think it had been sitting in like the bottom drawer of his desk or something. I don't recall him wearing it in the sort of the later years of his life, so it must have been there for a good sort of 25, 30 years, I reckon, maybe longer. And actually, miraculously, I can't believe it. You can hear it. It's pretty crunchy. It's pretty crunchy, but it does work. It winds, and it actually, I mean, I haven't had it looked at or the movement checked or anything like that. So I don't know whether it's a replacement movement or it's the original movement. I have no idea. I'm actually going next week to a place in Perth for them to have a look at this and actually start restoring this. But amazingly, it works. It actually runs. And I can't believe that's original the movement. But if it is the original movement, that is ridiculous, because this watch will be nudging, getting on for 100 years old almost. The whole thing looks pretty clean. It's got a really thick sort of plexi crystal on it. That's sort of unimportant, really, to me. This was given to my dad on his 21st birthday, which I think is pretty special. And perhaps it's only fitting that this should go to my son on his 21st birthday if it's still running, which I can't think it wouldn't be. But in the meantime, I definitely would like to wear it. I didn't actually realise he had this watch. My mum doesn't really know much of the story behind it. She just knows that his dad gave it to him on his 21st birthday. He's obviously not alive to shed any more light on that side, so I don't know. But it is incredibly special. This wasn't going to come along today because I wasn't sure whether I would have this. My mum's actually visiting from the UK for the next sort of couple of months, so she brought it over. So I'm lucky to lucky to have it. Yeah, it kind of had to be in this 3-watch collection, only because really it sort of fits in with the Aquanaut. So if this was my dad's, watch that he was given, honestly, I think if I'd known about this, I may not have gone ahead and bought the Aquanaut. I may have just basically got this overhauled and redone and worn this and been quite happy. And maybe I wouldn't have fallen down this ridiculous rabbit hole. But I feel like, in the 3-watch collection to present, they go quite nicely together. This one is was my dad's on my 21st, and the Aquanaut is, the sort of the ode to his memory, essentially. So to have those two watches together really is quite fitting. I mean, between the three of them, it symbolizes everything that I love about watches. The story behind them, the feelings that they evoke, certainly from the IWC, and the sentimentality in kind of collecting, which is, it does sound a bit wanky and a bit sort of pretentious, but that's kind of how we justify these things to ourselves almost.
Thank you. I love the stories and concept behind your trio. I've spoken to a few watch collectors now, and we have touched for you that sentiment is quite important. But
Yep.
Do you have a philosophy that you stick to when you do collect watches?
I don't know whether it's a philosophy per se, but I've got to like the watch, how it looks, obviously aesthetically, and how it wears. And that's a tricky one, actually. That's an interesting one to bring up, because often when we're sort of trying on watches in boutiques and dealers and things, we don't always have an opportunity to try on the latest and the greatest, especially these days where a lot of the models they're not in stock, they're not readily available, so you can't. So you don't get a real true feeling of how a watch wears, like day to day, and like with your various outfits and shirts and what have you, and just general day to day life. So I have found myself getting watches to have for a longer period of time to sort of get more of a feeling from them, and in doing that, often found that comfort is probably it's not necessarily a philosophy as such, but it's definitely a key component. Legibility as well, which is with the Arabic numerals on dials, has always appealed to me, and it's quite fun. Now, my son's like 5, he counts and stuff, so when he looks at all my watches, I try and not get caught up in hype, and I try and take a step back and look at for a watch, for what it is.
Yeah.
I'm not particularly a movement snob necessarily. I'm not sold on the watch just by the movement. It's the package.
Yeah.
It's the package of the watch. It's what's comfortable. It's what's legible, and it's what's sort of aesthetically pleasing.
Would you say you're pretty happy with your collection now? Any proposed changes?
No, I'm pretty happy. I'm incredibly fortunate to have any one of these watches, I would be, and just have one, I should be incredibly lucky. We were saying just before we came on that trying to get my collection down to 6. I think that's a nice number. I'm a little bit above that at the moment, but I think we'll get there. I think we'll get there in the next year. There's a couple I'm thinking about, but there's other things that are happening in my life over the next year as well that I also need to be sort of smart about. So, watches, as much as I love them, there are other things in life. There are a couple I'm eyeing up, but on the whole, I'm happy for 2024 just to be a year of sort of reflection and enjoyment. I think that's actually one thing that I wish I'd probably done more of is really sit back and watch and enjoy other watches and ask questions more about those watches that people bring into their collections and use that to formulate what I'm sort of looking for. Because I think through this journey, what I've tried to do is find what my niche is, but by buying a lot of things and trying them out, rather than sort of formulating my opinion before just jumping with both feet.
Thank you, Duncan. You've been an absolute joy to be in the studio today, and the sentiment and the stories behind your watches is incredible. So thank you for that.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me in.
And guys, tell us what's in your 3-watch collection. Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video as much as I did, be sure to check out our other content. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the next 3-watch collection.